As much as I love to develop a good relationship, if there's anybody who's busier than farmers, it's definitely food service directors. It's hard to nail them down, it's hard to develop that relationship, and it's hard to just make it all work in a way where crops are growing and kids need to be fed. And so to be able to sort of find that middleman outlet that is able to bridge that gap is beautiful.
All right, welcome to CNG Field Notes. This is a podcast rooted in the unique experience of our certification's peer review inspections. Our goal is to capture that farmer-to-farmer knowledge exchange we see happening at the local level and share it across our CNG community and beyond. I'm your host tonight, Erin Torgerson. I'm CNG's certification specialist and programs coordinator. Today we're going to be deep diving into the farm-to-school movement and learning how market-scale farms can seek out these sales outlets and build relationships with local schools and institutions. But before we get too deep, we want to send out a huge thank you to our sponsor, LocalLine, for helping making this first episode of Field Notes possible. LocalLine is a farm-to-fork platform that helps both food producers and school food buyers manage the complexity of local sourcing. Whether you're a local farmer selling to a school district or a food service director managing multiple vendors, LocalLine simplifies the entire process from ordering to payment. So thank you again to LocalLine. We are extremely thrilled and honored that these folks across the screen from me have agreed to be a part of our first Field Note recording. We are joined by Sam Otto, the owner of the Woven Trifecta, a CNG farm in West Michigan, and Passion Rutledge and Tomas Delgado from the National Farm to School Network. You all have incredible stories that brought you to this work, and we'd really like to hear kind of just what brought you from point A to point B. So we'll start with Passion, calling in from Arkansas. Can you tell us how you became the finance and operations director for the National Farm to School Network?
Sure. I'd say my origin story for food system work begins with a sabbatical during the first Trump administration. Soon after the election, around 2017, the nonprofit I was working for at the time closed down, and I ended up moving to Hawaii as a WOFR, which is the Worldwide Organization of Organic Farming. And I was working on a flower farm out there. So I was doing hard work, hard labor. I did work trade for my housing, and I grew food in a garden for my meals. I lived very simply and off the land, and that was the first time in my life I had done anything of that like that. And I really connected to where my food came from. And so from there, I wanted to do something to make sure that other people could have similar experiences as me, that could be transformative. I found working on a farm to be a transformative experience for myself, and I wanted to be able to give that to others. And so I started looking and doing food systems work, and I started locally here in Arkansas, working on a farm called St. Joseph Center of Arkansas. And from there, I was able to move to the National Farm to School Network.
That's awesome. The St. Joseph networks are really amazing friends of CNG. So that's a great connection.
Nice.
Cool. Thank you for sharing. Sam, can you tell us a little bit about how you got your farm going and then how you started to work in the farm to school role?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So I have a small, mainly direct-to-consumer farm over in West Michigan. We do chemical-free veg for the most part, as well as some flowers and fiber. And when I first started farming, I was actually working with a produce prescription program within the healthcare system, which was awesome. It was a great sort of insight to like farm to institution work. Unfortunately, during COVID, a lot of that sort of unraveled and became really inconsistent and not like a stable way for me to seek into institutions. I think during that point, I was interested in moving into farm to school, but couldn't quite make that connection. Eventually down the line, I just sort of stuck more with the direct to consumer, doing a little bit of wholesale with restaurants and some small grocers. And eventually a grant opportunity came up a few years ago that was statewide that actually linked farmers directly with a local food service director where you could develop a really like stable relationship with them, which sort of got me started into dabbling into that market. And then sort of simultaneously, I also accepted an off-farm position for the off-season with a countywide farm-to-school program. So I sort of get that internal, external feel for farm-to-school.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm excited to hear more about that direct link. That seems like such a great opportunity to get that relationship going.
Totally.
All right, Tomas, you are stationed or kind of based in Illinois, but where are you calling in from today?
Yeah, I'm calling in from Lake Delton, Wisconsin. Was here facilitating some workshops with the Intertribal Ag Council, but I'm based in Urbana, Illinois, so East Central Illinois. And my origin story around school food actually started when I was in high school. I actually was able to work in my school cafeteria as a dishwasher, and it took up a class period. I was paid. I got class credit for it, and obviously it was a opportunity to learn more about just school food, but through that perspective. Fast forward to my time here or in Urbana, I've been working in local government and had managed a social service grant fund, which we had been able to fund some food systems development work that was being led through urban farms in my area, in collaboration with our school district and our public health department, and got to really peer into like the world of farm to school as it was unfolding in my community, and also be able to fund some of it through the funding that I had support of. That is what put farm to school on my radar, and kind of next to that process, concurrently, I was beginning to start a kind of a mutual aid network that was centered around growing and aggregating the yields from urban gardens throughout the Champaign-Urbana area, and then channeling all of that to some of our, I would say, just channels locally that are, supporting folks who are experiencing food insecurity. Kids were some of them, but that's what really allowed me to kind of get my hands dirty with growing food and growing food for community need. And this was happening concurrently as our farm to school program in Champaign-Urbana was just getting started, and eventually put my hat in a race for my position, and have been employed at NFSN since 2021. So it's been an interesting sort of course of career development and personal development, but really happy to be here.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all your stories. I'm so excited to have kind of both the perspective of a farmer, and then all three of you kind of have perspective on the behind the scenes folks that are doing the work kind of to make these connections between farmers and our schools. I know that a lot of folks listening, and CNG is really focused on direct to market farmers. So these are mainly small scale farmers that are growing directly in their community. And I know a lot of folks have interest in selling to schools or to other institutions, but it just feels really daunting. And I think there's a lot of, rumors get spread around, do you need to have GAP certification or just all these kind of different red tape and hoops to jump through. That I think people are just like, man, I'm already so busy just selling to a farmer's market that I don't know if I can even take on another thing, or how would I do that? And I'm just a small farm, but I think that it is certainly a sales outlet that is super important, as you all focus your entire lives around this work, and is also just not out of reach for a lot of folks. So we're going to focus our next time together here and our kind of the meat and potatoes of how we get these relationships going. So I'll ask some kind of pointed questions as we go, but I'll say to Passion and Tomas, if one of you want to describe kind of different ways in which schools source food and who are the main players when it comes to sourcing foods and menu planning, where would you suggest is a good place for a farm to start seeking out these connections?
Yeah, so conventionally, most school districts are in partnership with many of the broadline distributors that are providing a lot of the meals that you would commonly see in many schools around the country, and those are companies like Sodexo, Aramark, Cisco, so very giant and sophisticated distributors that are representing a range of clients and institutions therein as well. So schools primarily have a lot of procurement partnerships with those firms, and to a growing extent, they have been able to establish more relationships with regional distributors, based off of one's region, and to take it sort of down one scale. From there, developing relationships with food hubs, aggregators, and other sort of kind of companies or nonprofits that are lower to the ground, but representing a collective of farmers within their own networks, which is a bit more of a local procurement stream for schools. And in terms of how a farmer could establish a relationship with a school, there are many different channels to go through, and one could say that like even broadline distribution channels are still getting farmers' foods into schools, but through a highly sort of processed and I would say really sort of mileage heavy means. But within local spaces and within local efforts, if you are within a region that has intermediary presence, so the presence of food hubs and aggregators, that's certainly one avenue to kind of test the waters of farm to school without going straight to the school and establishing sort of relationships with the school food director, which is also a channel in itself, but you have to be the right farmer with the right variables to do that. And when I say right, it's just mainly, do you have the time to do that kind of outreach? Do you have the time to solicit your products in that kind of a way? Do you have the time to build a relationship with a school? And is that a goal of yours? And there are many benefits to that, being seen as a pillar within your community, certainly having the presence of your products within a institution setting. But some of the drawbacks is that there's limitations on what the school can procure from you solely, and also you have to have all of the resources and means of providing that school what they want. So there's several different channels, and you have to find the ones that work for you as a grower. But thankfully, our organizations such as NFSN have a lot of resources to kind of walk you through all of those different market channels and help you understand their drawbacks and benefits.
That's great. Passion, do you have anything to add to that answer?
Tomas spoke about this a little bit, but menu planning, part of your question was menu planning, and that's definitely something that you do with food service directors, but there's input also from dietitians and then of course state agencies. And then sometimes you have these private consultants that will consult for the school districts on menu planning. So menu planning is another one of those complex processes when you're trying to feed, hundreds of thousands of kids a day. So that's all I would add. But if you're going to do it, start small. Start with one product, one crop, one item. One district, start small, build up.
That's great advice. Great advice for farming in general, but also for the sales outlet. And Sam, you said you got a grant that connected you directly with your kind of point person. Can you describe how that relationship started?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if that was like the most successful grant, but it did tap into farm to school. So I was connected with like one food service director was like at a district like outside of my county, and the other one was within. This grant happened like right like into like end of growing season school year, so there wasn't really that like established time to be able to set up like not only a relationship with them, but also like the understanding of like what seasonality looks like and what's
Hmm.
available and in what quantities, and also to fully shift from like I'm using full capacity to like pay my bills through direct to consumer outlets to sort of switch into a wholesale outlet. The cool thing about that grant was that it did sort of give like a risk-free guarantee situation where they paid farmers up front for participating, and they also provided food service directors with a stipend to pay the farmers for the product. So like I was paid for both of my or both my time um as well as any product that I sold. So it was sort of like an easy way to work into it without too much risk on either side. I will say that it really didn't continue after the grant. It was more when I stepped into like farm to school as an educator and sort of like gradually finding my way internally within our community network of that, that I was able to really like develop relationships with countywide food service directors and figure out sort of the ins and outs of what needs to happen.
Hmm. So on kind of on Tomas's point there, I think you really structured your business around this being like a goal of yours to seek out those relationships. As for somebody who is just kind of interested in exploring that sales opportunity for that outlet for the first time, as a direct to market grower, what are some other kind of smaller places to start? It's just like baby steps of getting into or starting those conversations, or other places to look in
Yeah,
that sphere.
Tomas mentioned food hubs. That wasn't something that was like directly available in my general area when I started with Farm to School, but it's something that's becoming more available, and I know is more available like more widely on like a state and national level. I think that that's a great way to start, where they've sort of created the relationship with those folks so that you're able to just sell your product. As much as I love to develop a good relationship, if there's anybody who's busier than farmers, it's definitely food service directors. It's hard to nail them down, it's hard to develop that relationship, and it's hard to just make it all work in a way where crops are growing and kids need to be fed. And so, to be able to sort of find that middleman outlet that is able to bridge that gap is beautiful.
Cool. That's a great. It's a great point that there's more than one ways than just bringing your carrots directly to a school and hoping for the best. Before we started recording officially, Passion, we were talking about just kind of organizing your upcoming conference and trying to figure out the best time for farmers, but also for food service directors, and how it's kind of a clash. One's busy and when the other one has a little bit more downtime. So as far as kind of getting those relationships going, when's a good time for can you kind of describe how the year for a school is planned out and how those menus are planned, how long it takes to plan out for a menu, how far in advance, so farmers kind of know just the layout of what that work looks like?
Yes. So typically, like, the funding comes in, the budget is established, all of that before the school year even starts. And so I know one of the challenges that some people have been reaching out to me about is that we've got this new USDA funding coming, but it's in the middle of a school year. And so it's going to be a little bit challenging with that grant money. But typically all that happens in advance of a school year. And you really need to be building those relationships like before the growing season. So when Sam was talking about connecting with food hubs, that's one of the major advantages of being able to connect with the food hub, because the school might establish their menu, and then they determine how many like tomatoes they need for the salad, for example. And then they go to the food hub and say, this is how many we need. And the food hub is able to aggregate from a whole lot of different farmers. And so that's the advantage, because a lot of times what happens is that when the school does establish what they need, the farmer may not be able to provide that right away, or one farmer might not be able to provide that. So it's a tricky process, and that is why those middlemen and those aggregators, or us, NFSN, to be able to point you in the right direction, you really need to build those connections out in order to make this happen. Now, I do know about schools that have directly worked with school food service farmers who have worked directly with school food service directors. But as Sam mentioned also, that's the harder way to do it. So if you want to be on time and be part of the school's planning, then you need to go with those aggregators or build those connections during the times that are busy for farmers, right? Like during the summertime, during the wintertime, you could reach out to schools, but you're going to have to do that knowing that you will not get into the school's menu until the next school year. So it's okay to reach out when the farmers have time, but it means it's going to take longer for your product to actually get into that school.
Right. That's super helpful just to know that, kind of flip that schedule. So when farmers have downtime, school kids are still in school normally. I know that we've kind of heard some examples about farms that have found their way into selling school, but have had to really kind of rethink how they're packaging and selling their food. For instance, we've seen examples of like foods students need to receive like 4 ounces of fruit per meal. So the farm had to sort their fruit into 4-ounce portions and then distribute that to the school. Can you explain, Tomas, a little bit about how kind of federal mandates around school lunch nutrition comes into play when a school is sourcing food?
Yeah, there are mandates that the USDA does have for schools to, basically ensure that they're providing fruits and vegetables at a certain portion size, and that does obviously create a barrier for certain growers, especially if they're only working sort of by their own operation out of any kind of cooperation with other growers or being represented by a aggregator or food hub, because then you'd be able to kind of mix and have a variety of different sources of any fruit or vegetable type. But for farmers, it does require that there needs to be an emphasis on creating consistency in the packaging and the delivery schedules, but also to whatever extent they're capable of doing, ensuring that they're picking out the sizes that are appropriate for school food procurement, which, for better or worse, are very specific at times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a challenge, but I think, again, like finding that middleman that can help kind of do that sorting for you is a huge step. To Sam, I'm guilty of this as a farmer, that I always equate selling into like a hospital or to a nursing home or to a school, that I need to have some kind of food safety plan, and ideally a GAP certification. Is that the case, or is that kind of a state-to-state requirement, or can you describe some other kind of red tape hurdles that farmers might have to look at to kind of enter into those relationships?
Yeah. So I should know like the actual GAPS rules, and I'm sort of blanking on what they are, but I know that farmers making like under a certain dollar amount are typically exempt from those. What I've chosen to do in regards to food safety is I've worked with my local food safety technicians on a FSMA food safety plan, FSMA. I'm assuming it stands for food safety something something. Acronyms, man.
Yeah. We'll link it in the show notes.
Get in the show notes, yes. But yeah, I worked with my local food safety technician to help me develop a food safety plan to ensure that, any food that we're producing and selling is top-notch, safe, But with that, I'm able to share that plan with food service directors or with like a food hub to make sure that I'm falling within those guidelines. Another really cool thing, I'm not sure if this is just within my state or if it's a national opportunity, but our food safety technicians have cost share programs. So I've been able to work with them to upgrade different resources on my end. So most recently, I was able to use the cost share program to purchase some larger food grade tubs that work a lot better for farm to school in regards of like delivering and like their storage and their coolers. So yeah, plug into the cost share programs. It's made a really big difference to be able, especially in like the farm to school world, to be able to have a solid food safety plan and also be able to make some of those extra investments that's sort of harder to make without those resources available.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us like the brass tacks of what, if you had to make any changes on your farm or just in your day-to-day schedule to kind of meet those FSMA requirements?
Yeah, you can tell me if I'm not answering this right. I think that I've been working with the food safety folks for I don't know, at least like 5 years or so. So I feel like it's been like pretty wrapped up in like what is like I feel like I don't know, it's like been so long that I'm like, what did we have to like change or update?
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like, they do come out every season and they just like make sure we're like following the plan. They make sure that we are like see if there's any like thing that we need or any like concerns that we have. I feel like the biggest was like, especially as being a smaller farm, our wash pack is like a pretty seasonal wash pack. Some of it's outside, so like our sanitation process is probably a little bit more like consistent than I don't want to say consistent than like an indoor wash pack, but like there's some of those things to be aware of. So like as we get further into some of this like farm to institution work, we're looking at like building out like a new wash pack that sort of fits like actually like more of those like GAP standards and like really just elevates what we're able to do and feel good about the food safety aspect. Yeah.
Did you incorporate any like record keeping or things like that?
Oh, yeah. We keep records. A lot of records.
Farmer's favorite word.
What was that? Yes.
A farmer's
absolutely.
favorite word.
Clipboards everywhere. Clipboard spreadsheets. But yeah, we like trying to think of an example, but yeah, anytime we're using our wash pack, we do like record keep like in regards to like sanitation and to regards of like what we're wash packing and anything like that.
Yeah. So there's a bit involved, but it's not like you don't think it's like an overcomable hurdle.
No, it's pretty straightforward. We were doing a lot of that for direct to consumer as well, so nothing too crazy, but if record keeping's scary, it could be a little
daunting. It's a little extra work. Passion, I'm curious if you're a small farm and you're wanting to be involved in your community and find a way to access just like providing food to these different institutions, are there some kind of out of the box ways to participate that's not necessarily like that produce showing directly up on like a child's plate in the cafeteria, but kind of like other ways to be in the sphere?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I mean, it's a lot of small farms that want to do this and they just don't meet the volume or the certification requirements. It is what it is. But I think something that I feel like hasn't been tapped into enough is farmers actually engaging in after school programs, summer feeding sites, early care centers. All the requirements for those can be a bit more flexible. Private schools also can make their own rules And so they don't necessarily have to follow the National School Lunch Program. And so that can change as well. That can be different. And then there are schools that we're constantly encouraging to have school gardens. And that's another way that farmers can tap in the actual agricultural education portion. Help educate the kids on the food. That's a huge thing that teachers need help. A lot of these teachers who are doing school gardens, they don't have farmer backgrounds. They've never grown anything, and they're growing something for the first time. And so how great would it be to actually have a farmer come into the school and help? These teachers, they need help. So there's lots of different ways to be involved, but definitely after school, summer feeding, early care, tap in.
Mm-hmm. That's super helpful. I love just there's so much there that I'm excited to dive into more. So before we started talking, we were also talking that you do some farm field trips as well. Can you talk a little bit about just the logistics of that and how you were kind of already involved with the school at that point, but how could a farmer kind of like present that as an option to a school, and what kind of like liabilities are involved maybe in that?
Yeah, totally. So, we've been offering field trips for the past few years. Myself and a few farmer friends all sort of like rotate in regards to hosting, and it's really wonderful just to get kids out there and learning. Being like in and outside of the school, they get to see me in the school, so it's sort of cool where they're like, whoa, like you weren't kidding, you are Miss Farmer Sam, like you're actually doing this. So it's really cool to give them that on-farm experience. As far as like getting into it, I think a really cool tie-in is if you sort of like know their curriculum, or if you're able to like speak to like a curriculum director or even just a teacher, sort of settling in on a grade. Second graders are super cool because like they're young and enthused, but also like still like very like you can impress them. And so that's sort of an age that I really enjoyed working with out at the farm. We've had different ages out and they're all great, but really working with teachers or really anybody in the school district that sort of knows that curriculum and sort of finding ways to tie it in. So like, for example, we work a lot with students whose focuses are like 5 senses and habitats, and like different like sort of topics like that, where we can sort of combine in their curriculums to what they're seeing on the farm, which has been super duper helpful. As far as liabilities,
that's up to the school. You're just the farmer.
Yeah, so we traditionally like, have sort of left it up to the school a little bit. I mean, we of course like have insurance and stuff. It's such a gray area where it's like, hopefully it's all going well, but we've just sort of worked out a situation with the school where there's like waivers and all those good things, and knock on wood, it's all been beautiful so far with no concerns.
That's what we want to hear.
Totally.
Tomas, I think there's been a lot of conversation, or just a lot of wariness this year with just like funding freezes and funding loss, and we've heard some like pretty extreme cases of farmers that have really relied on these kind of bigger wholesale or institutional accounts, like losing the funding or the match funding and needing to close down or kind of really significantly restructure their business. Since you all are at the national level, can you give us just kind of like an overview of like, you know, is it, not to say is it as bad as it seems, but is it, is there still hope out there, or what are some other places for folks to like look, since it is a significant amount of labor, and to find ways to kind of offset that with some funding help?
Yeah, absolutely. It has significantly impacted how I think anyone that's serving as a technical assistance advisor will like approach advising any grower to look to schools that at one point had funding to have more discretion within their food procurement budgets. But that's not to say that the lack of funding that schools we'll soon experience around local procurement won't be the barrier that ends farm to school or any kind of local food. Here in Wisconsin, for instance, a number of the food hubs are actually forming cooperatives to be able to provide more volume at lower costs. So, in some ways, aggregating the aggregators to have more of a local impact, but keeping it very state-based. And then there's a very long, extensive history of farmers forming cooperatives to engage in school markets, particularly in the Southeast. I'll be speaking a bit about this at an upcoming conference, the Black Farmers and Urban Growers Conference, because many of these growers that formed cooperatives in the 90s were Black farmers that were trying to compete with larger farms and looked to their institutions within their communities as viable and steady markets for them. But they did so sort of in cooperation with each other, and in many ways formed food hubs as a result of that sort of collective work, which allowed them eventually as cooperatives to tap into things like group gap certification, which allowed for shared cost of those auditing processes and just more alignment with how they're working with each other and accessing and accessing resources for each other, and I would say just scaling at a level that's aligned with your neighboring farmers. So there are plenty of strategies that we can look at our history in this country around farmers accessing markets innovatively. We just need to tell those stories and also highlight the current innovations that are happening from state to state or region to region.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you for that overview. All right, we've reached our audience participation part of the evening. We've had some really great questions that have been written into us ahead of time, and we've got a couple here in the chat. So these are just to anyone, if anyone just wants to jump in with some thoughts and answers, but kind of in terms of, we talked a little bit about how even selling to food hubs or selling to a school, that a lot of packaging is oriented around count sizes versus weight. I think a lot of farmers are used to selling wholesale in weight. So is there a place, this question's from Brian, is there a place where farms can get a better understanding of pack sizes and like what those counts or the size of the fruit or produce, kind of what those needs are, whether you talked a little bit about that, like consistency. So is there a good place to start kind of getting that gauge in your brain?
That's a good question. So one of the sort of like barriers with that I've received, and sort of a way that I've worked around that, is I mainly sell salad mix to the school, so I still do it by the pound. And that's been really beautiful in terms of, like, they were using a large scale supplier. So I'm just saying, okay, you were buying 100 pounds a week, I will sell you 100 pounds a week. And that works really well. As far as some of those like count crops, like I think a lot of that is sort of in like the fruit world. So I'm not so much on that side, but in the veg world, I've found it really hard to market in quantity some of the vegetables, just mainly because of the need for skilled labor for processing and like the feasibility of processing that. I know like locally our farm to school network is sort of working on a countywide processing kitchen to sort of take that ease off of each district, because right now it's like you can buy 100 pounds of carrots, but who's going to peel and slice them? And when, you can just buy them from a larger procurement space, already peeled and sliced and ready to go for a smaller amount. So that's sort of a barrier that I've faced in terms of like that quantity aspect. But I've stuck with some like salad mix and like spinach, things like that have sort of been like an easy switch over where it was already happening and there's very little processing that has to go in on the food service side. So that's sort of been my go-to.
Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts on that answer?
Yes, the USDA has the food buying guide for child nutrition programs, and so that's going to tell you that's going to tell you how they want to buy it, and so that's very helpful to you as a farmer to know this is how they want it, this is how they're going to purchase it, so this is how I need to show up with it. I find that to be a pretty useful resource. You can find that on the USDA.gov site. It's right there. But also, you can check in like with those food aggregators that we were talking about as well, because they might have slightly different yield requirements, or they might lower them, or they might change them a bit because they know that they're working with small scale farmers. So definitely also look for your farm to school coordinators in your state. They are also a good resource, and they can just send you over their requirements per state as well.
Cool. Those are great resources. And I love that thought too, Sam, of like thinking about like getting it to the plate and like what steps are involved. And so things that like fruit are probably pretty straightforward as far as just picking and getting it to the school. Kind of a comment here from Brian, who works for a food hub, and he just wanted to mention that, you know, even if a farm is selling to a food hub, it really helps the food hub to have their story, because even though they're aggregating a lot of different farms, it really is meaningful to schools and to the folks that are buying from them, that they know where this food is coming from still, even though it's going through a middleman. I think that's a great point, that stories always have impacts. And I think a lot of people want the idea that a farmer really just dropped off the food at the school, but it is, like, as we've talked, it's just, there's so many barriers involved. Okay. Somebody asked about selling meat versus selling vegetables. Would anyone like to take a stab at that?
Yeah, there are plenty of protein to school programs that we can reference off of. Many of them, for obvious reasons, are very regionally based in terms of just working within the parameters of those states that are ranching protein and selling them to schools. But it's a possibility, like any other product, starting small and ensuring that the beneficiaries of these products, so kids, are open to like whatever protein that you are selling. So I find that any food item is deeply relevant and reliant on the cultural composition of that school. But protein seems to be something very specific. There are bison to school programs that exist throughout tribal nations and communities that may not be as successful in other areas where bison is a bit more unfamiliar. There's fisheries that are obviously selling to schools in coastal communities, but those are kids that are growing up eating fish in other areas of their life. So I find that the success for approaching the school is just highly dependent on the region and knowing the culture that you're working with.
Yeah, that's a great note. Just be aware of your surroundings. And always the takeaway, start small. The resounding note of the day. I'm going to combine, one of the questions was, are there solutions for selling to schools that don't have well-equipped kitchens, or I've heard of plenty of schools that just have capacity for reheating? And then combining that with the question in the chat from Brian of, are there farms in your network, have you heard of farms working with co-packers or other innovators to provide ingredients to be sold as a value-added product? So still fresh, healthy options that result in less labor. So something that could be like pickles or coleslaw or things like that.
One cool thing that's happening with our farm to school program is that our county has a career tech center. which is where like students from all over the county who are a junior or senior in high school can go to the Career Tech Center and sort of like trial a certain area of work that they'd be interested in. So one of the opportunities is culinary and hospitality, and we work directly with those students to have them come up with like USDA guideline like school food lunches or recipes for them. So they start out like, we give them a local food or a local vegetable, I guess I should say, that is sort of like the theme of that. They do this twice a year. They each, there's, you know, probably 15 or so kids. They each start with 3 recipes, and it gets narrowed down to the 2 best recipes that fit within those like school USDA guidelines, are processing like, or easily processed within kitchens throughout the county, and are things that like students would actually want to eat. So they get to go around to schools throughout the county and actually trial those recipes, and that's been really cool to see, both on a level of they're now moving into like production to make those at scale to use countywide, and it's also been really helpful to see sort of from the farm perspective to understand like what exactly they need in terms of production.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a great it's like the full circle of selling the food to another institution that is now selling back to the institution.
Totally
incredible. A question about product agreements or forward contracts. So if a farm is at a scale where they could sell directly to a school, like we've mentioned, there are pretty big yields that are needed, but for a farm, that's a big risk if they're asked to, you know, supply 500 pounds of carrots over the year. You know, they're going to really chart out their field to do that. So, Passion or Tomas, do you know anything about those kind of agreements?
Yeah, there are plenty of examples from state to state. I'm thinking one, Michigan, having models for schools to design forward contracts that would allow for some barrier reduction for farmers to, you know, take that leap into, you know, developing an actual, you know, longer term relationship with a school. That certainly sort of helps the farmers in terms of having, you know, financial flow inwards without a lot of the commitments that would be normally kind of required within a formal contract. And it allows for the school to kind of test the waters with scaling that farmer up to a demand that's, you know, a little bit closer to some of the more significant needs of that meal program there. You know, NFSN, the USDA certainly, but also the folks at Michigan State University do have plenty of, I would say, just templates for forward contracting that schools can adopt and that farmers can review to get a sense of like what are the dynamics of this contract versus something that's a bit more formalized.
Cool. That's super helpful to know that those templates exist. I'll be coming through our conversation and make sure that I link to all these things in our recap. So we're just going to close things out. So coming to the end of our hour together. Just going to ask a little lighthearted question. I was saying before that this conversation and doing research for this episode has made me really contemplate my farm lunch, or my school lunch rather, growing up. So I'm curious to know what each of yours favorite, like what was the thing you looked forward to if you saw it on the school menu, or you were like happy if you had it at your school lunch as a kid? I'll go to Sam.
Oh gosh. I was a cold luncher, but the school cookies, man, the chocolate chip cookies.
Let's get in with the cookies. Passion.
Yeah, it wasn't anything good. Similar, definitely the cookies or the honey buns.
Tomas.
I was really partial to the taco in a cup because I liked leaving the lunchroom and going to the library or other places like that. And it was just a very convenient and non-messy way of taking my lunch elsewhere. So
I love that. Mine was it was like a peach cup, but it was definitely frozen, and the lunch workers definitely took it out right before, and so it was still frozen, and it was like the slurry of like peach slush, and it was perfect. I don't think I would have liked it if it was like room temp, but frozen was perfect. And then lastly, we would be remiss if we didn't get to talk a little bit about the National Farm to Cafeteria Conference coming up this December. So Passion, can you give us the lowdown?
I sure can. The 10th National Farm to Cafeteria Conference is happening December 1st to 4th this year, 2025, in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And that December date is because we're really hoping to have more farmers and more producers be able to come this year. We're super excited about that because our conference is one of those places where you can make these connections. We will have school food service directors there. We will have your regional food hubs there. And of course, if you can't come, we have those resources on our website as well. For the NFSN's website, we have a map that gives resources in every state. But this conference is really an opportunity to meet those people in person, to connect directly with those institutional buyers that are looking for your products, for your healthy, sustainable, locally grown foods, to learn about the food safety, the procurement issues, the barriers, what you can do about them, the creative pathways. So you can come learn from other farmers, and you can learn from other people in the food industry to see how all these things work together. And so we typically gather anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 people, all dedicated to school food and senior food for senior facilities, food for ECE, all the institutional food. So come out. It's an exciting time. It's a learning time. It's a sharing time. And we really need this right now, this moment. Farm to School has had a lot of challenges this year, and this is a joyful opportunity.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Great. So if this conversation got your wheels turning, and you're looking to kind of get those conversations going in person, why not head to New Mexico this December? A great time to be in the desert. I would like to be there. Denver's deserts in the winter. There's nothing better. All right. Well, we are sure to put up all the information that we talked about, information about the conference, a lot of the different resources that we mentioned. We'll put that on our website for folks to look up and check out and figure out how to get connected within their own communities. We want to thank you again to Local Line for helping make this conversation possible. And thank you very, very much to Tomas, Passion, and Sam for being here and just contributing all of your knowledge and expertise and your time. If you are interested in learning more about CNG or certifying your farm, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly with any questions. You can reach me at Erin, ERIN, at naturallygrown.org. Stay tuned for all the CNG Field Notes yet to come. We're just getting going.